This story I'm about to tell you is an amazing story about George Bush Sr., the 41st President of the United States of America, and his time in the military during World War II. Off the coast of Japan, there's a small island called Chichijima. It was home to a Japanese military base that held two massive radio towers that were placed on two tall mountains. They were a vital part of Japanese communications during the war. Because they were so important, the Japanese heavily fortified the island with troops and lots of anti-aircraft guns. Americans would send bombers and try to bomb the towers, but were unsuccessful countless times. They also knew it would be impossible to take the island by sea as its fortifications were way too strong. Bombing it was the Americans' only hope. The Americans would use aircraft carriers parked offshore of the island to load up their bombers. Months into unsuccessful bombing raids, a young 20-year-old George Bush would be selected to take part in these raids. He was the youngest pilot in the military at the time. Even though he was young, he actually had lots of experience. He even previously survived being shot down. On the morning of George's raid day, he and the other two soldiers in his plane got it ready and took off with all of the other planes in his raiding party. Even though he was the youngest, George's plane would be one to lead that raid. There were more than a dozen other bombers behind his. How these bombing runs would work is they would fly well above 8,000 feet to avoid anti-aircraft defenses. Then, when they approached the radio towers, they would have to dive down below 8,000 feet and release these bombs. They did this countless times, every plane, and every time before this, it was unsuccessful. This time would be different, as George and a couple other of the aircrafts in his raiding party would drop bombs directly onto the tower that they were assigned to bomb. When planes like his dive that low, it is almost impossible to avoid being shot up by anti-aircraft guns, as well as other defenses. So every plane that went and bombed that radio tower took heavy, heavy fire. Every single plane was shot down. The planes went down. Many soldiers ejected to avoid dying in a crash. Sadly, everyone who did died from complications with their parachute or landing too close to shore and being captured. Other than George, who flew his plane further than anyone else and lower than anyone else, and while on his way down, he held out just long enough so that when he ejected, he was able to get onto a raft and get to safety. Even though Japanese patrol boats could see him and were chasing him and were going to capture him, American aircraft came in to save the day. He was eventually picked up by an American submarine. When George was shot down for the first time, he would have learned how important it was to fly as far away from the enemy as possible to avoid capture, and that knowledge saved him from a horrible death. Unlike the 8 soldiers from the raiding party who ejected in their planes way too close to the island, way too close to the enemy, and were captured, tortured, and killed. In 2004, classified information of what happened to those 8 soldiers was made public. The 8 men ejected from the plane way too close to shore and were shortly captured. Once captured, the Japanese took the soldiers to one section of the island and had them huddled together. The Japanese really held high resentment towards the Americans, as they had suffered high casualties in the months of being bombed, and it didn't take them long to exact their revenge, tying up the youngest of the Americans, encouraging their soldiers to beat and kick him, all while he was tied to a post in front of his other fellow American soldiers. In the night after he was beaten, he was marched to a shallow grave and beheaded. He did not fight the beheading. He welcomed it, as he did not want to be tortured any longer. Hours after burying him, a high-ranking Japanese officer, known to be very sadistic, decided he needed his soldiers to prove that they had the fighting spirit by eating human flesh. So he dug up the young American that he had his soldiers beat, and he had surgeons prepare cuts of meat to be cooked and to be eaten by the Japanese officer and his soldiers. Within a month, the officer decided he would have more human meat for him and his soldiers. So he ordered his soldiers to tie up one of the remaining 7 American soldiers and had them work on their bayonet work on him. After they were done, he had his surgeons remove the pieces that were left of the man that were able to be prepared properly, and he had them cooked. Immediately after, the Japanese would take another soldier, but this soldier would not be taken so easily. He would fight back and extend his neck until the Japanese gave in and just beheaded him. Within a few days, the remaining 5 Americans would be executed in similar fashion to the first 2. Out of those 5, 2 of them were consumed. And out of those 2, 1 was consumed while still alive. This man having parts of him surgically removed to keep the meat fresh. After the war was over, 34 Japanese soldiers were tried for the war crimes, and they were all found guilty and hung, including the high-ranking officer who coined the sadistic idea. All other soldiers on the island who knew about it but were not directly involved spent 8 years in prison, and then they were released. George was 80 years old when he learned about the horrific story of what happened on Chichijima and the terrible fate he almost suffered. Instead, he went on to become the 41st president, and his son went on to become the 43rd president of the United States of America. Thanks for watching and listening. This has been an amazing story about George Bush Sr. and his time in the military during World War II.
Hey guys, if you liked that video, please smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. We got a video coming out every single week, me and Tristan. So please subscribe, like, and enjoy our content, because that's why we're making it, for you guys to enjoy it. Thanks.